Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriela Vokic, and I'm an associate professor of linguistics here at SMU in the World Languages and Literatures Department. And today I would like us to talk a little bit about how we can transform our office hours into something that I like to call a student success zone instead of these hours becoming just another chore that we have to tackle during our professional day. So here's a quick outline of what I would like to accomplish with this workshop. First of all, I would like to share with you the reason for choosing this particular topic. I think that without that context, the topic selection may appear somewhat random or arbitrary, which in my view, it's not. In fact, I think that this particular topic feeds directly into an immediate need that we currently have on campus. Then I would like us to spend some time busting myths that pertain to office hours and talk about what office hours are, but also what they're not. Then we're going to spend some time talking about barriers that limit student use of office hours. And these are important because only when we bring these barriers to the forefront of our consciousness are we going to be able to meaningfully transition to step number 4, which is designing office hours that our students will want to attend and that we are going to enjoy. Now, notice here that the we enjoy part is in parentheses, and that reflects my belief that fundamentally these hours are for our students, not for ourselves. However, I was very hesitant to put this bit in parentheses because I also firmly believe that the only successful model of office hours is going to be the one where both parties involved, the student and the professor, are getting something out of it. We might be getting different things, but everybody's getting something nonetheless. And then, of course, some key takeaways. So, as far as the reason for choosing this particular topic, this topic came to me after many years of serving as a faculty representative on the SMU Honor Council. In particular, I have been serving on that council for 4 years now, and I have thus far attended many hearings. And in those many hearings, I started noticing certain recurrent themes or certain trends. The first one is that extremely frequently academic integrity crises could have been averted in a one-on-one contact with the professor. For example, what book edition to use or not to use, how to properly cite sources, how to properly do in-text quotations, what kind of AI usage is allowed and what is not allowed, how to prepare a final project, or more specifically, what kind of help is acceptable when working on a final project and what is off limits. And you don't have to have many years of teaching experience to look at these and go, hold on a second. You, the student, are in this big pickle, which is going to have serious repercussions for your time at SMU, possibly thereafter as well. And we're all here sweating bullets because nobody during these hearings thinks that this is a pleasant thing. So we're all going through this horrible situation. Exactly why? Because you, the student, couldn't have been bothered to knock on your professor's door and ask these elementary questions. That simply didn't make sense to me. So I decided that I was going to inspect our professor's syllabi, and I have to do that as part of the procedure anyhow. However, this time around, I was looking for an explicit and very transparent statement pertaining to office hours. And sure enough, all of our professors were in compliance. The vast majority of us have something along the lines of what I'm currently projecting on the screen. So this is the model of office hour statement that I refer to as the bare bones because it has very little text, as you can see, and it only makes reference to the when and the where, and that's the extent of that. Um, an extremely small percentage of our professors go a little bit above and beyond this, meaning that they have a paragraph in their course policies, a short paragraph, but a paragraph nonetheless, that talks about not only the when and the where, but also about the how, meaning that they have a sentence or two explaining what they expect to see happen during those hours. So, since it seemed like the professors were fulfilling their end of the bargain, I made it a point to ask the students in these hearings whether they were aware that they have access to their professors outside of the class period. And that brings me to my second recurrent theme in these hearings, which also coincides with an extremely rude awakening for me, because all but one students indicated that they were in fact not aware that they can rely on their professors outside of class for different reasons, but they were not aware. Some of the reasons were that they perceived that we're perpetually busy, so it's kind of like, what's the point? Other times they would say that the professor did not hold regular or really any office hours, even though they indicated so in their syllabus. And on other occasions, the students remarked that they perceived an unwelcoming atmosphere as if to deter the student from ever coming back. So all of this led me to conclude that the system that we have in place when it comes to this topic is broken, and that it's our responsibility to fix this, the professor's responsibility to fix this because office hours are in our job description, and B, that the only way to fix this broken link is to be very deliberate, very intentional, and very clear about delivering the message to our students that access to us outside of class is not only an option, it's something that they're entitled to, it's something that they're guaranteed in their 4 years with us here at SMU. So that's more or less how the topic was born. I think that this is the first initiative along these lines, but I certainly hope that it's not the last. But let's pause here for a second because it's possible that there are some of you who are listening to me talk and looking at these slides, but you can't help but wonder, okay, but what else do you want me to do? No, I mean, seriously, what else do you want me to do? Because I already have something along the lines of what you're projecting on the screen, and I have it in my Canvas syllabus, my simple syllabus, my office door, maybe even your email signature. So short of tattooing it on your forehead or physically dragging the students into my office, what else do you want me to do? And if that's you, my answer is I hear you, I get it. Your view was my view up until a few years ago. But let's see what else is going on here. When I communicate my office hours to you in the way that I currently am on the screen, it's not highly likely that this is going to be perceived by you as somehow threatening or intimidating or that it's going to stress you out for a couple of different reasons. The first reason is that, first of all, we're colleagues, so there is no power dynamic going on here. The second reason is that we have some sort of shared experience, even though we don't know each other. That shared experience consists of the fact that, first of all, we have held office hours at some point in time, and while we may not have done it identically or even similarly, we have some general idea of how they should transpire. Also, part of our shared experience is that we were all here at some point in time grad students, and that means that we have spent copious amounts of hours sitting down with our mentors during their office hours, revising our thesis, and all that good stuff. So, the point that I'm trying to get across is that when I communicate my office hours in such a basic, uninviting way to you, that's not a big deal because, like I said, there is no power dynamic and we have some shared experiences. So basically, we more or less know what's going on. But the question is the same true of our students? And I think that we know what the answer to that is. In fact, let's look at the same thing from a different perspective. So let's say the weekend is upon us and I want to invite you to a party at my place. First of all, keep the context in mind. The context is that I don't know you, you don't know me. We may have run into each other on campus, maybe a faculty meeting or two, but that's it. Outside of that, you don't know where I live, who I hang out with, or what kind of parties I throw. And because that's not enough, all I had in lieu of an invite was this sad little paragraph towards the middle of my current screen, excluding the image next to it. And as you can tell, my invite uses a fairly basic font. It has a mere 3 lines and it very uneventfully reads this Friday, 8 to 11 at Gabriella's house. So my question to you is, would you come to my party if all I had in lieu of an invite was this paragraph towards the middle of my screen, excluding the image? And it's not a rhetorical question. You're going to have an opportunity to answer in the next slide. Answer honestly, you're not going to hurt my feelings. So as you can tell, all of my respondents were in agreement that they would not attend my party. A, because they don't know me. B, because my invite was everything but explanatory and inviting. So, my question to you is, if you wouldn't come to my party because you don't know me and because my invite was everything but inviting, what makes you think that our students would come to see us during our office hours under the same conditions, on top of there being a power dynamic going on? And this is something for us to keep in mind as we progress with this workshop. So if as I'm going through this presentation, you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I get it, but really all of these are just your impressions of the situation. There's really no empirical evidence to support any of your claims. I have good news for you. And the good news is that a very basic, a very superficial search on Google Scholar pulls up well over 21,000 articles on this particular topic in mere milliseconds. And I was able to get my hands on the first 15 or so, and thanks to ChatGPT, I was able to comb through all of them and bring to you some of their key takeaways. So the key takeaways from the most recent research on office hours are as follows. The first one is that office hours are consistently underutilized. The second one is that student perceptions of our office hours strongly shape attendance, and also that alternative formats have the potential to increase engagement. Continuing with the key takeaways from the most recent research on office hours support more than academics. Then also faculty communication about office hours matters. And lastly, equity gaps exist in office hour use. Now keep in mind, these takeaways are just from the first 15 or so studies that I was able to get my hands on. We also have some anecdotal, but I would say insightful evidence as well. And I will let you read through the student responses on your own. My only comment pertaining to this slide is going to be that I could have guessed many of the reasons why our students don't come to see us during our office hours, but not in a million years could I have guessed that they've never attended office hours before, that they don't know what they're for or how to go about them. And that's something very important for us to keep in mind. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what office hours are, but also what they are not. So I found one of these funnies online, and I'd be lying to you if I said that it's the prettiest thing that I've seen in my life. However, I decided to use it because I think that it gets the message across. And the message is that there are many misaligned perceptions about what it is that professors do during their office hours. So we, of course, think that we're doing some really important stuff during our office hours, but it seems like our department chairs think that it's just a social hour with our colleagues. Society apparently thinks that we are buried in busy work, grading papers, catching up on emails, lesson prepping, and all of those good things. And I would argue that a good chunk of our students also belong in the same category. Then there's a smaller percentage of our students who are convinced that the only thing we're trying to achieve is to get them to never come back. Occasionally, it's possibly a break, though I would say that it's never the kind of kick back and relax at a 100% kind of break, but maybe a lunch break or something along those lines. However, most importantly, I think that the vast majority of us, especially the people who are present at this talk today, want to be here. Whether we achieve it or not, or how frequently we achieve it or not, is a different matter. But fundamentally, the vast majority of us want to be here when it comes to office hours. Now, if you thought that this slide was for your entertainment only, think again, because this is going to turn into a question for you on the next slide. Before looking at the responses, let's first take a look at the question itself. So the question reads, what do your office hours typically end up looking like? So notice that I didn't ask, what do you do during your office hours? How do you set up your office hours? What happens during your office hours? Because those questions to me imply that there's a right and a wrong way of going about your office hours. Instead, I very deliberately asked, what do they typically end up looking like? Because I'm assuming that we all want to be in a square where the professor is meaningfully working with the student, but sometimes, due to reasons beyond our control, we end up doing something very different. So now that that's clear, let's take a look at the responses. Well, while it's true that the number of respondents is low, I really don't think that the situation would have been vastly different even if there were more people who responded. In other words, I think that the vast majority of our colleagues can echo that their office hours are fundamentally some sort of busy work, whether catching up on emails or grading or lesson preparation, while they're at the same time taking their lunch break. But this is important information for us because if we know where we are and we know where we want to be, we can use the information from this workshop to bridge that particular gap. Now, let's talk some rules and policies. The first thing to remember is that office hours are mandatory. The second thing to keep in mind is that office hours are not optional. Now, I'm not one for redundancy, but this has been set up in this particular way very deliberately to drive a certain point home. Can you guess what that point is? And if you said that the first two bullets are non-negotiable, you're correct. Now, details will vary from school to school, college to college, department to department, and also depending upon one's teaching load. But there should never be a conversation along the lines of should you or should you not hold office hours to begin with. The next thing I want to do is share with you what we do in the World Languages department. Now, keep in mind that this is just an example and that your unique needs, the unique needs of your students and your department in this regard need to be discussed with your department chair. In any event, in the World Languages department, we often hear that the dean requires at a minimum 2 contact hours per week, no matter how many courses you teach, preferably on different days and preferably at different times. Now, the first bullet is non-negotiable, and the remaining two, if you can incorporate them, great. If not, not a big deal. However, I would like to rephrase that to say that while not incorporating different days and different times might not be a big deal for us as professors, it is very much a big deal to our students because you know how our schedules work. If you have office hours Monday and Wednesday from 1 to 2, the student who has class on Monday from 1 to 2 highly likely has class on Wednesday from 1 to 2 as well. Therefore, they will not be able to come and see you. So here's some additional examples, not necessarily all of them from SMU. So some places require 4 hours per week or 5 hours per week, and if my door is open, 2 office hours per course per week, 1 hour per 3 credits, same as the number of credits for the course, but they can be concurrent. And also some schools that are more geared towards teaching require as many as 7 to 10 hours a week for a basic load. So some important takeaways from these examples are that first, the bigger your teaching load, the more office hours you need to have. And that is fundamentally for our own sanity because if you have sections of 50 or 100 students, 2 contact hours a week is simply not going to be enough. But more importantly for this talk, the takeaway is that under typical circumstances, no school exempts its faculty from holding office hours. So let's say that again. Under typical circumstances, so unless you're on maternity leave, on sabbatical, or medical leave, or something along those lines, no school exempts its faculty from holding office hours. So if you don't remember anything else, please at least remember this. So now it's time to transition into talking about barriers to attending office hours. But before we dig into those details, I would like you to consider the image that I'm using on this slide, and I would like you to tell me if you can guess why I'm using this particular image to talk about barriers when, in all frankness, I could have chosen anything else. I could have chosen a brick wall, I could have chosen some garden hedges, I could have chosen a good old wooden fence. But I didn't. I decided to use this red carpet rope separator or whatever it's called. Why do you think that I chose that barrier instead of any of the other ones that were available to me? And if you said that it's because of the power dynamic that's taking place in this relationship between professors and students during office hours, you are absolutely correct. Another important aspect for us to contemplate before digging into the very details of the barriers is this reflection here. So I would like you to take a few minutes and answer these questions for yourself. The first one is, how many of your students regularly attend your office hours? Then, who do you usually see? And lastly, is this your intended goal? Meaning, are you seeing what you want to see in terms of what's transpiring during your office hours? But also, are you seeing who you want to see? Meaning, are you perpetually talking to the same students, maybe your top performers, but not reaching the crowd that maybe needs your attention more, such as some of the students who are a little bit more shy and reluctant to participate or engage with the material? Because when we understand these questions, we are going to be able to make use of the barriers more efficiently. Barriers can be classified into three categories, and the one I will be talking about first is purpose. So, as I already mentioned, students are confused about what office hours are and how to go about them, and this is especially true of our freshman students, our transfer, and our first gen students. But then, when they do have some idea of how these should transpire, they often have these very extreme views. So, on the one hand, they think that office hours are either for problem students, or on the other hand, that they are for the top performers in class. And if you are anywhere in between, well, better luck next time. Often they perceive that office hours are meant for students in emergency situations, such as failing a course, incomplete grades, or excessive absences. And then also sometimes they think that office hours are only for asking specific questions, or that you should only go if you can't figure out the answers on your own. So you can see from these that yes, these are some of the things that we do during our office hours, but these are not the only things that we do. So we need to be more deliberate about communicating to our students what it is that happens during these hours. The next category of barriers is somewhat unsurprisingly convenience. And in this regard, in person office hours were perceived as not worth the effort when the professor was easily reached via email or by phone. Additionally, if email was perceived or explicitly indicated as the preferred mode of communication by the instructor, well, then office hours were seen as plain redundant. And this was interesting to me because our own CTE director and my colleague, Professor Icleanu, shared with me that he communicates really well with his students via email, and that is highly likely the reason why his students don't pay him a visit more often during his office hours. However, he also very clearly indicated that that was not the result that he was going for. So, what we can learn from this example is that we shouldn't only be paying attention to direct messaging about office hours, but that we should also carefully examine our course policies, course syllabi, and other materials for any unintentional messaging about office hours. And then, of course, there's conflicting times, which is when we're holding office hours when our students are either in other classes or working. This also applies to our students who are caregivers. And lastly, when the location was out of the way or would require the students to return to campus. And this, of course, goes for our commuter students. And lastly, but not least importantly, instructor approachability. So if students came to see you one or two times and it didn't go well for whatever reason, it was off or clumsy or weird or awkward or whatever label you prefer, it's not likely that they're coming back to see you again. Then also, certain instructors appear to actively discourage office hour visits. And so an extreme example of that is the one that I have here for you. It's from a study conducted by Smith and colleagues in 2017. And in this example, the professor tells the student, you can't just come to see me with questions that take a long time to explain. That's considered private tutoring. Now, to be fair, while I understand where the professor was coming from, I also full well understand how or why the student would never want to see this teacher again in his life. Then also seeing an instructor in a one-on-one setting can feel intimidating or anxiety-inducing, and this is especially true of our first-gen students or our underrepresented students. And lastly, they often feel that they're a burden to us, and on a related note, they see us being constantly busy, so they don't want to interrupt our work. So now that we know what office hours are supposed to be and what they're not supposed to be, what are the rules and policies, what are the barriers that stand in the way of our students attending office hours, how can we use all that information to design office hours that students will attend and that we will enjoy? The first strategy to design office hours our students will want to attend is to reframe them as a learning tool. And there are a couple of different ways to go about this, but the first step should be to redefine their purpose. Because sure, office hours can be just a Q&A session and they also can be just a help session. However, they have the potential to be significantly more. They can be a space for mentorship, idea exploration, clarification, confidence building, really a space for growth. Now, it might be a different kind of growth than what the students experience in the classroom, but growth nonetheless. The second thing for us to think about is how we refer to our office hours because, and I know that what I'm about to say is shocking coming from a linguist, however, language matters. And here's what I mean by that. Every single office on campus has office hours. Let's say the dean's office, they have office hours. SMU Park and Pony, they have office hours. SMU Ticketing, they also have office hours. HR, they have office hours too. However, all of these different office hours that I just mentioned are vastly different in content and in purpose than professors' office hours. So I think it's vital to communicate to our students that this notion that office hours are office hours or office hours is in fact not the case. Okay, well then, so what do we name them? Well, I'm going to share a couple of ideas, and you should feel free to be as creative as you want to be. The only important criterion here is that whatever you choose feels natural to you. If it feels awkward, if it feels uncomfortable, then you might not be achieving the result that you want. So, some ideas, you can call them student hours or open lab or a student zone, coffee with Professor Jones. Like I said, whatever works for you. For me personally, next semester, I want to actually try to call them a student success zone and see where that gets me. One thing that would never work for me, though, would be to call them coffee with Professor Vokic. It's simply not my thing. On a related note, it says, explain the purpose in class. And I do this, I know that you do this, but also every other faculty member on campus does this the very first day of class. So it's perfectly normal to assume that students will forget the moment they leave the classroom. That is why it's paramount to carve out some space in your syllabus to talk about how you conceive of your office hours that particular semester. And this is important not only because it gives the students an opportunity to go back and revisit in case they had forgotten what you said the first day of class, but also because it communicates to the students that you have one set of expectations for your office hours, and those might be similar to mine, but they also could be vastly different than mine. And this is another way that we communicate to them that office hours or office hours or office hours is really not a thing. And lastly, it says normalize and humanize. And the first item here reads mention your own struggles as a student. And if you can relate them somehow to office hours and tell your students how your mentor's office hours helped you with your struggles, wonderful. But I don't think that it needs to be as linear as that. For example, when I was at Purdue, I worked as a TA and I used to teach Spanish as a second language. And very often, very often, I would share with my students my own struggles as a non native speaker of English. And this is important because of the empathy element. So you are showing your students that you understand the situation that they're going through. And also, not only do you have empathy for them, but also you're an expert in the field and you have the tools to take them from point A to point B, or in my case, to the proficiency in Spanish. And lastly, it says explicitly invite students individually or during class. For example, I have office hours on Monday from 1 to 2, and I have class immediately before that. I will never pass up an opportunity to tell my students as I'm saying goodbye to them, hey guys, but also remember, I have office hours today, so swing by, come say hi, or ask me something, whatever you want to ask me. I guess what I'm trying to communicate here is that all it takes sometimes is just a reminder. So, what are some additional strategies that we can use to incentivize office hour attendance? Well, first of all, consider making office hours part of the course culture instead of them being a marginal aspect. And for me personally, one of the easiest ways to accomplish this is to simply encourage the students to swing by just to say hi or to check in so that you can get to know them better. Of course, this is the individual attention element, and as you know, here at SMU, we pride ourselves in being able to offer our students this kind of individual attention. However, from a practical standpoint, some of us are able to do more of this in the classroom and others not so much. If you're the professor who, for whatever reason, is not able to offer their students individual attention during the class period, if you're holding regular office hours, that is your opportunity to do so. And also related to the first bullet, if you're hearing this and thinking, well, this is just silly. Why would I have the students swing by just to say hi? And then on top of it, I have to engage in some kind of small talk that I don't care for to begin with, instead of doing something more meaningful and covering more course material. Well, I'd beg to differ that a strategy like this is silly or nonsensical because if you can get the students to be so relaxed and so comfortable around you that they want to swing by just to say hi, then when they're struggling and when they're facing challenges, both personal and academic, they are naturally going to gravitate towards wanting to come to see you, and it's going to be absolutely effortless. You will not have to do anything else. So I really cannot say more good things about this seemingly simple strategy. Also, if you're thinking, well, I like the idea, but I really don't have the time, keep in mind that these kinds of exchanges happen almost in passing, and the students will tell you so themselves. They'll say things like, hey, I was on my way to see Professor so and so, but I saw that your door was open and I decided to, see how you're doing and say hi. That's really all there is to it. And then the next strategy is to offer a low stakes assignment that involves visiting office hours. And this one is a strategy that I'm particularly fond of, even though I haven't used it in a while. But some years ago, when I used to teach advanced grammar, my students had to prepare a portfolio assignment. And one of the activities that counted towards a portfolio was to come and see me during my office hours and talk to me in Spanish for approximately 15 minutes. And it was absolutely delightful for everyone involved. First of all, my students were getting the points that they needed for the portfolio. Most importantly, they were using the grammatical structures that we had seen in class, and they were using their Spanish. Additionally, we were building that rapport that we couldn't have built in class. So, absolutely delightful. And then another unexpected positive outcome of this strategy was what I like to call the word of mouth effect. In other words, those who came to see me regularly became so comfortable, and then they shared their experiences with those who were a little bit more hesitant or reluctant to come and see me. And then in the end, they too started to come and see me more frequently. And then consider using flexible formats. So, thankfully, in this day and age, we have the opportunity to do online office hours. So, of course, there's Zoom for that, or there was a workshop, I believe, last year that taught us how you can teach ChatGPT to become your teaching assistant. But my personal favorite is an asynchronous Q&A in a pinned Canvas discussion board, and I will show you what that looks like in the next slide. So here's my pinned Canvas discussion board, and you can't really tell that it's pinned from the screenshot, so you're just going to have to trust me on that one. But most importantly, here's how I set this up. First of all, notice that it's titled Course Q&A, and that's because this discussion board started off as a designated place for my students to ask questions about the course throughout the course. So these were non-confidential questions that could be considered my omissions or that were related to my omissions, so to speak. So things like unclear assignment instructions or errors in the course calendar or a missing link or a broken link and things along those lines. And I decided to put that here because way too frequently did I find myself in a position where multiple students were asking the exact same question, and yet I had to send everyone an individualized answer, and I just didn't think that that was a good use of my time. So I decided to streamline it here so that when one student asks the question, I answer it, and then we all benefit from that knowledge. But then I decided to expand it. So I said, you can also use this section to ask questions about our homework and other graded assignments, since the question on your mind is probably the same one your classmates are wondering about. By asking it here, everyone benefits from the answer instead of just a few individuals. So similar situation, right? When an important assignment was due or when the midterm was, upon us or things along those lines, I would get students upon students upon students emailing me with the exact same questions. So I decided, well, let's do the same thing on this exact discussion board. And this actually turned into something that I never thought would happen, which is they turned into these really engaging, really productive learning sessions and test prep sessions because students would ask the questions, and yes, occasionally I would answer, but also very frequently, students who knew the answer to the question that another student posed, they were the ones plugging in the answers. So this turned into something really, really dynamic that we all really enjoyed and really benefited from. Now here, what's really important is to, first of all, set your Canvas notifications to daily delivery because, like I said, this was, for us at least, this was for graded assignments or for tests, and that means that students' questions are time sensitive, and if you don't catch them, well, then you're not helping your students. And then also, of course, something that's understood, but it's important to mention that all personal or confidential questions need to go through your personal email. All right, back to strategies that incentivize office hour attendance. So under flexible formats, we have rotating times to accommodate varied schedules, but also rotating times to accommodate different aspects of the course, especially around important assignments. So the first bit of this strategy, I think, is fairly straightforward and it means exactly what it says. We already briefly touched upon it before. In essence, what this means is that if you insist on having office hours Monday, Wednesday from 1 to 2, you need to understand and be aware that the student who cannot come to see you on Monday also won't be able to come to see you on Wednesday because that is simply how our schedules work. So you can stick to that schedule if you're so keen on it. However, you need to understand that you have an obligation to these students as well, and it's your responsibility to come up with a solution for them. But I find it even more interesting personally that it rarely occurs to us that we can also rotate our office hour times to support certain aspects of our course. What this means is that you don't have to stick to your vanilla office hours throughout the semester, meaning you can have your regular office whenever, but then when important aspects of your course arise, you should feel free to switch gears or to pivot to better support your students' learning needs. For example, let's say we have midterms on Monday of next week. You can say, okay, I have my regular office hours whenever, but this week and this week only, I'm not going to do my regular office hours. Instead, I'm going to do office hours every day at whatever times. And in fact, if you wanted to go further and you wanted to support your student even better, you could say, this week and this week only, every and any topic that is not pertaining to the midterm is off limits, right? And then when this important assignment is behind you, you can go back to um, to, as they say, regular programming. And I can tell you that students really appreciate this. I do this typically around finals because that's when they need us the most. And when we come through, they are not only grateful, but they really find it useful. And then lastly, it says team up. So there was a question that arose. Somebody asked, well, what would you do if you had a section of, 100 students? And I understand where this person was coming from. I think also that the implication was that some of these strategies are simply not sustainable for bigger classes or larger sections and things along those lines. And my answer to that would be, well, first of all, if you have 100 students, 2 contact hours a week is simply not going to be enough. And that is for your own sanity and for your own well being because you are not an octopus, okay? But also, I would say you don't have to do it on your own. Of course, if you have TAs, you know that you have TAs and you can rely on them. But if you don't have TAs, well, I'm sure that you have certain, um, students who are doing really well in your class who can lend you a helping hand. So, for example, we have the midterm upon us, and the midterm covers the units, I don't know, phonology, morphology, and syntax, right? And so I'm going to say, okay, I have this person here who is going to be helping everyone who needs help with phonology. I'm going to be helping with morphology, and Johnny here is going to be chipping in with syntax. So you really don't have to do it on your own. Another option is if you teach multi section courses, you can join in forces with a colleague, and then you can say, okay, well, I'm going to be here helping students with chapters 1, 2, and 3, and my colleague is going to be helping with chapters 4, 5, or 6, or something like that. So there are always solutions, but we need to be creative. So how can we structure office hours for impact? Well, first of all, keep in mind that you have your traditional one-on-one mentoring setup that we all know and love, and there's a time and a place for that. But then, depending on what you have going on during the semester, I would say don't shy away from group sessions either. I personally love these group sessions because they very quickly and very easily turn into these collaborative, very lively problem solving review sessions. And I make use of these during important times in the semester, high stakes assignments or assessment for students, when I know that there's going to be a long line of students in front of my office who are all highly likely going to ask me the same or similar questions. Well, under those circumstances, it simply makes no sense to me to give every single one of my students that individualized kind of attention that we discussed earlier. So then instead, I will just make sure that everybody's on board with a group session, and sure enough, they always are, or in my experience at least. And I also love these group sessions because students are truly at the epicenter of discovering and delivering knowledge because they're looking at each other's analyses, they're fixing the mistake in each other's analyses. There's the student who asks a question that stems from not understanding the material, but also inevitably there's a person who knows the answer to that very question. So they truly shape what they want their review session to be. Of course, I'm there, I'm guiding, I'm intervening, but fundamentally, they are the ones that create the review session that they need and want to have. And then another benefit of group sessions is that they lower the effective filter a lot. And to give you an example. So, how many times have you been in a one-on-one setup with the student and every single question that they ask is prefaced by, oh, I'm sorry if this is a stupid question, or this is likely a silly question, or I apologize if this is an ignorant view, and things along those lines. In a group session, there's none of that because they see that everybody around them has dozens of questions, A, and B, that everybody's really comfortable asking those questions. So, of course, they all feel compelled to do the same thing. And lastly, keep in mind that you can use more focused hours, or here it says themed hours. And this goes directly hand in hand with something that we talked about recently, which is that we should feel free to rotate our office hour times to support important assignments during our semester. And what I mean by that is that, for example, in the week preceding an important essay, right? Instead of calling your office hours just your regular vanilla office hours, consider calling them essay brainstorming. And now you can say, well, what's the point of that? That's just unnecessarily complicated and it's not really a meaningful change. It's just makeup, it's a surface change. And I beg to differ that a change like this is trivial because remember that we said towards the beginning that more often than not, students really don't understand full well what office hours are for. But at the same time, students know what aspects of your course they're struggling with. So if you have a student, Johnny, who doesn't know what you do during your office hours or what should happen during your office hours, but they know that they're struggling with writing the essay for your class. If in that week, directly preceding the essay due date, if you change the name of your office hours to essay brainstorm, well, that will tell Johnny that, hey, listen, this particular week he is doing or she is doing something that I need help with. Therefore, they're going to be more likely to come and see you than if you just leave the name at office hours. And then lastly, it says provide tools to guide these sessions. Because remember, we said that even those students who kind of sort of know what they are, many of them don't really know how to go about them. So one of the ways to accomplish that is to provide sign up forms or sign up sheets with optional prompts, such as what would you like to discuss? And I like these kinds of prompts because oftentimes students are in this panic mode. I don't understand anything. Everything is, way over my head, and these not really constructive thoughts. So when you give them a prompt, that gives them an opportunity to sit down, take a deep breath, and take inventory of what actually they know and what they don't know. And after some time of thinking about it, they realized that in fact not everything was as black as it appeared. So they realized that they understand topics A, B, and C, but maybe X, Y, and Z they help with. So that's why I like these prompts and sign up sheets for. And also, when you get this feedback from them, that gives you a little bit of time to prep more exercises um, or handouts or whatever to support their needs. Now, you will notice also that I have an asterisk here next to sign up forms, and that's there because I really believe that your regular office hours should not be something that students have to sign up for. They should not be something that your students should have to email you about. Your regular office hours should be an open door kind of thing, right? And I'm not saying don't do it. I know that many of us, have these little apps that allow the students to sign up and all that stuff. That's all fine. Just keep in mind that the more steps you incorporate into you know what leads up to your office hours, the less likely they're going to stop by and see you, right? So if they have to sign up, if they have to shoot you an email, then they might say, oh, well, I'm in the vicinity. I would like to go see her, but, I didn't sign up or I didn't let her know. Therefore, I'm not. But if they know that you're there, so you're there, whether they show up or not, they're more likely to actually show up. Excuse me. And then lastly, it says provide templates for common questions. So, how to ask for help, how to talk about a grade, what is the most efficient way to go about office hours, and things like that. And I'll share with you the template that I use in my syllabus. But before I talk about that, I want to share a little bit about this second item, which is how to talk about a grade. Well, I come from a culture where you don't discuss your grades with the professor. The grade is what it is. If you don't like it, better luck next time. And that's the end of that story. So when I moved to the States, that was a really truly foreign concept to me, which is why I was so grateful to my mentor who sat me down and said, okay, Gabriela, this is something that in this culture you can in fact do, but there's the right way to do it and there's the wrong, excuse me, there's the wrong way to do it. So this is something that I found really, really useful. And as I mentioned on the next slide, I'm going to share with you how I define for my students how I conceive of my office hours. So thus far, we have seen a couple of different ideas, models, and formats of what you can do with your office hours. And so if you're thinking to yourself, yes, but that's a lot, and you want us to be as precise as possible when defining for our students how we conceive of our office hours, so does that imply that now all of a sudden our syllabi that are already 50 pages long, are they now going to be 70 pages long? And my answer to that is definitely no. First of all, I would suggest not to implement everything at the same time. I would suggest pick a couple of characteristics that appeal to you now, implement them in the spring, monitor a little bit, and see how it goes, and then tweak from there. But it really doesn't have to add a whole lot to your syllabus. And so I wanted to show to you what I have in my own. And really, all I have in my own syllabus is this paragraph here. I'll admit that it's a chunkier paragraph, definitely chunkier than some of them, but it's also not the longest one by any stretch of the imagination. That would be the attendance and absences paragraph for sure. So, how do I go about this? I guess what I'm trying to say in these many words is that all you need is one chunky paragraph to say everything you want to say to your students. So, let's read what I have, and then I'll probably be stopping and making a couple of comments as we go. It says, it is a common misconception that professors are not to be bothered during their office hours because we are busy. While we are busy, office hours are time that we carve out specifically with our students in mind, so I would like to encourage you to take advantage of them. So you'll notice that I started off by busting one of the most frequently held misconceptions when it comes to professors' office hours, or certainly the most frequently held misconception by our students as evidence, but what I was able to hear during the honor council hearings, right? So the reason why I want to start off this way is because I wanted to communicate to them that, listen, I know what you're thinking, and what you're thinking is not a constructive way to think about this particular topic. And then I go on to the when and where. So I tell them this semester my office hours will be on Mondays from 1 to 2 and Tuesdays from 2 to 3. I'll hold office hours in person and via Zoom. And then I go a little bit above and beyond that to tell them how they can go about this, right? So I tell them both types have their own sets of advantages. Zoom office hours are great when you're in a time crunch, have a quick clarification check, or a very specific question or questions that you need answered. In-person office hours allow us to get to know each other better and create a rapport above and beyond what we established in class. They're great if there is an aspect of the lecture that you're not understanding, if you have a question that requires a more elaborate explanation, or if you have multiple questions. So again, this is my telling them what can transpire during one session as opposed to other. Of course, none of this is set in stone. If they have a quick clarification check and they happen to be, nearby Clements, which is where my office is, of course, I will gladly help them out. Okay, but this gives them some sort of a general idea if they don't know what these should look like. But then I go above and beyond that. So I take it a step further because I want to explicitly tell them what my expectations are, right? Because we talked about this before. What I think of how I define a productive session is not necessarily how their chemistry or philosophy professor conceives of it. So I tell them, whichever type you choose, please identify the areas and questions you would like to go over before coming to see me so that we can use the time constructively. For example, saying, I don't understand questions 1, 2, and 3, or what do you expect under question number 1, excuse me, is a more productive use of our time than leading with, I don't get any of it, or what's the question for number 1. Right. And so this was important for me to communicate to them because I noticed in the past that certain students just show up to my office with this laundry list of questions and they're not even interested in engaging teaching and learning why the answers were wrong and things along those lines. And so I noticed that that doesn't work for me. And this is where I'm asking them to specifically identify the areas that they want us to work on. If there ends up being more or less, that's fine. That's easy to accommodate, but we need to have a starting point, okay? I think that thus far in the talk, you were able to notice that I have been using images fairly deliberately, and this image here is no different. So I want to start talking about this section by sharing with you the story behind this particular image. So many years ago now, when I was working on my undergrad degree, which was in Hispanic philology, I was struggling with a particular aspect of Baroque literature. And it took a really long time for me to make a decision to go see my professor and seek her help because we were all scared of her. She was extremely rough around the edges, very unapproachable. But I needed help, so I decided to go. And I walk into her office, I greet her, and I tell her that there is an aspect that I'm struggling with and that I was hoping she could help me out. Well, her answer was, Miss Vokic, you should know that. And I'm standing there thinking to myself, well, while that may be true, I don't, and that's why I'm here. So I waited another, I don't know, it must have been no more than 30 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity for sure, hoping that she would change her mind, but she never did, and so I left. And so this image here represents my emotional state after that encounter. And that leads me to the next aspect that we need to consider when we're designing office hours that we want our students to attend. And that would be to be very extremely deliberate about creating inclusive and welcoming spaces. How do we go about that? Well, first of all, be aware of your physical environment. I know that many of us have these, as I like to call them, creative messes in our offices, and you have one pile of paper here and another pile of paper there, and you're buried in between, books and all of that good stuff. I know that that works for the vast majority of us, and that's perfectly fine. But for those, however many hours during the week, just make sure that, those are positioned in some shape or form so that the students don't have to hop over them to be able to talk to you. And then also another deliberately used image for the creatures of darkness amongst us, myself included. If you like to work in the dark, wonderful. I get it. I'm one of you. But, make sure that crack the windows open or crack the blinds open, at least when your students are coming to see you. And think about it from your own perspective. When there's a power dynamic and you need to sit with that person in a dark room, that's just really creepy. You've heard Dr. Turner say many a time that we have the most beautiful campus, so why not every so often take advantage of outdoor office hours as well? Emotional impact, keep eye contact with your students, a warm greeting instead of just, okay, let's see what I can help you with, right? Give your student your undivided attention, no multitasking. It's very tempting to say, well, while they're working on a problem set, I'm just going to answer an email or two, right? We've all been there. But I would suggest not to do that. So follow the student's process, correct mistakes as they go. They really appreciate when you're present, not only physically, but mentally as well. And then the second bullet says open-ended student-centered questions to break the ice. So for me personally, because I'm not a small talk person, that doesn't work for me. I'm not entirely sure how to do that, especially in a language that is not my native language. But one thing that works really well is these open-ended student-centered questions. So, something as simple as, hey, how's it going? How's life treating you? How many courses are you taking? And it takes so little for these students to, unload some of that burden that they're carrying. They will immediately tell you how many credits and what course they're struggling with the most and which one are they really enjoying. What are they doing during the summer? What internships they have going on? What do they have lined up or not lined up for after graduation? It takes a very subtle scratch on that surface for them to share that with you. So do show genuine interest in who they are. And then another deliberately used image. If you're wondering what this handsome guy with the yellow bow tie is doing here, I was wondering whether to share this or not because it might appear trivial, but I'll share it nonetheless. So every so often, I will notice that my students on their phone that they have their pet, dog, cat, whatever, and I love pets, dogs especially. So when I see that, I'll say, "Hey, is that your dog?" And of course, they will immediately start sharing, and you notice how their shoulders drop, their facial expression changes. All of a sudden, they're relaxed. And it makes perfect sense, right? So we know that in the American culture, pets are an important member of the family. We know that animals have all kinds of benefits when it comes to releasing that emotional stress. And I'm sharing that because it's worked for me every single time. And if it works for you, wonderful. If it doesn't, no big deal. And then lastly, it says supporting the whole student. So you're never going to hear me say at the college level that A for effort is okay. And I full well understand that correct answers are important for tests, for finals, even for homework assignments, but maybe not during office hours, right? Because we need to acknowledge, we need to be aware that it took them a lot physically and mentally and emotionally to come to see you. So maybe just for that, in that particular context, an A for effort should be fine. And then recognize the power dynamics and invite questions with curiosity, not authority. And that's something that Don talked about in his talk that preceded this one, right? So instead of just saying, no, that's wrong, and, let me show you what's the right way to do it, ask them, okay, well, tell me a little bit more, lead me to your answer. And more often than not, you will see that while their answer was wrong, their thinking, right, their reasoning, the reasoning behind that particular answer actually made sense. So there's no reason to not acknowledge that as well. And lastly, if you're really serious about this, you can do some assessment and reflection and use those data to further improve your office hour attendance in subsequent semesters. One of the ways to achieve that would be to track attendance and gather feedback either by using short anonymous post visit surveys or reflective prompts, or simply reviewing who is coming and who is not and adapting. So, in other words, it's wonderful if your top performers are consistently coming to see you from week to week, but are you reaching the crowd that perhaps needs you more, such as the ones who, hide in the back rows or who never participate or who are getting bad grades or whatever the situation may be. And you can also do this for long-term impact. You can correlate visits with academic confidence, retention, or performance. You can gather testimonials or success stories, and you can share either or both with subsequent groups of students to incentivize office hour attendance. And finally, key takeaways. First, make peace with the fact that your office hours are for your students and not for you. But even so, you can still be in charge of how you go about them and make them meaningful to both you and your students. Remember that it's not the case that office hours are office hours or office hours or office hours. Be deliberate in how you want to structure your own office hours. And here, remember that you can be as creative as you want to be. You can, of course, if you so choose, hover around this first door that I have in the picture, right? But you can also be a lot more intentional and you can rotate the times. You can have focus sessions. You can have group sessions. You can have whatever you decide that best serves your students' needs, right? So going back to this image, you can hover around the first door, right, or the first entryway. But if the more deliberate you are, the further down this path you go. Keep in mind that how you perceive yourself highly likely vastly differs from how your students perceive you. So go the extra mile to lower the effective filter. Because listen, we all think that we are very cool and very down to earth and super chill and very approachable. Nobody in their right mind is going to say, yeah, I'm really rough around the edges, stay away from me, right? But we also know that some of us are more down to earth and some of us not so much. In any event, no matter how you perceive yourself, no matter how your family or your friends or your colleagues perceive you, It's not likely that your students see you that way simply because of the fact that there is a power dynamic going on. So, like I said, do go the extra mile to lower the effective filter, or as the image suggests, don't be the black bear to your students. Make it easy for your students to attend your office hours. Don't be this guy's professor. Well, there may be a math professor or two who think that this is a brilliant idea, but that's a topic for another day. I think you know what I'm trying to convey. The more barriers between your office hours and your students in the form of sign up sheets, just shoot me an email to let me know you're coming, inflexible formats, inflexible hours, the less likely they will be to come and see you. Keep in mind that office hour how-tos might be second nature to you, but not to your students. So be redundant if that helps your students. And that brings us to the conclusion of this workshop. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that your office hour attendance increases in subsequent semesters. In the meantime, if you would like to share with me your own key takeaway from this workshop, please do so by using the Poll Everywhere QR code in the previous slide. Also, feel free to email me with any questions, and I would also be happy to sit down with you and brainstorm some ideas to address your unique situation. See you next time.